Okay, so chapter 4, the good news from far off, the first missionary. Cahill starts this paragraph with on page 101, first paragraph. He makes the lovely remark, "No man is a hero to his valet." In other words, no man is a hero to his personal slave or to his employee or to his servant. And that's he's particularly commenting here on the relationship of the Irish masters to their slaves that they would kidnap from other places, right? But I just like that line, "No man is a hero to his valet," because it that rings true throughout like lots of literature and stories that you find, even comedies. But we'll pass on from there. But that's his intro, and he's going to talk about Patrick here. Going over on page 102. So Patrick, as a teenager living in um, living on the main island, I believe he's from. I believe Patrick was from Scotland, actually. What we today called Scotland. But Patrick, as a teenager, gets kidnapped by the Irish on a raid that they're making, and he gets carried off to Ireland. And this chapter is just telling his story, right, beginning on page 101. So I won't go into all the details, but go back and reread it. Page 102, first full paragraph. Like many another, so he gets captured, he gets kidnapped, he gets taken back to Ireland, he gets brought inland, and he's made a shepherd. He's stuck out there in the fields with the sheep, through rain, through sleet, through snow. He's just out there living with the sheep, and he's made to be a shepherd. Uh, like many another in impossible circumstances, he began to pray. He had never before paid attention to the teachings of his religion. He tells us that he didn't really believe in God, and he found priests foolish. Um, so he was just a rich teenager, materialistic and stuff, and never really thought at all about religion or anything like that. But suddenly he's all by himself out here, in the Irish countryside with the sheep, and he begins to pray and to become more religious, so to speak. Uh, Going down through that paragraph, tending flocks was my daily work, and I would pray constantly during the daylight hours. The love of God and the fear of Him surrounded me more and more, and faith grew, and the Spirit was roused. So then one day I would say as many as 100 prayers, and after dark, nearly as many again, even while I remained in the woods or on the mountain. I would wake and pray before daybreak through snow, frost, rain. Uh, and so he begins to develop a spiritual life, Page 103. And he's living out there. And then one day, he hears a voice. Top of 103, the voice speaks to him, and it says, "Look, your ship is ready." And so this is Patrick's story. Again, Cahill's just telling us. Cahill's not trying to evangelize us or convert us or anything. He's just telling us Patrick's story as Patrick himself recorded the story. So one day Patrick is out there years later, and he hears a voice speak to him and say, "Look, your ship is ready." And he takes that as get up, and he gets up and he walks across the Irish countryside. Um, Probably about a 200-mile journey, hiding under bushes in the daytime so he won't be found as a runaway slave, and then traveling at night. He gets to the coast. He tries to hitch a ride with some merchants, and they're suspicious of him. This is probably a runaway slave, and they're like, "No, um, no way, dude." Page 103. But then, they see him a moment later, and they've changed heart. They've changed their minds, right? And there's this great little passage down there, bottom of 103, that last paragraph, middle of the paragraph, when they call him back to them and say, okay, we'll take you, hide in the boat, hide under this tarp, because we know what you are and we don't want anybody seeing us take you, right? Um, says, come on board, we'll take you on trust. They even offered their nipples to be sucked. I'm like, nasty. The ancient Irish version of kiss and make up. So, you might say to your little kids, or you don't have little kids, but I do, you might say, okay, guys, hug each other, say you're sorry. The Irish expression was, come on, suck each other's nipples. Like, that's nasty, but, that's what they say to Patrick. Great culture. When you don't say hug and say you're sorry, you say suck each other's nipples. Where am I? Page 105. So Patrick gets on their boat, which is kind of sketchy, man. Just they're like, oh sure, crawl into our boat and we'll cover you up and we'll take you somewhere, right? But he does. He gets in their boat. They take him back to the mainland, and he gets out, goes home to his parents, right? And he's back at home after years. They're like, son, we're so happy to see you, right? But he's changed. He spent years in the Irish countryside with sheep. He's become a very religious, spiritual person. He's got a relationship with God now. He prays regularly. He's a changed person. So he's not going to fit back real well into his life before, right? Page 103, halfway down that middle paragraph. But Patricius, or Patrick, is no longer a carefree Roman teenager. Hardened physically and psychologically by unshareable experiences. You can't share this experience with your parents. They have no idea, right? Hopelessly behind his peers in education. He's fallen behind in education. They're in 5th grade. He'd have to go back to like kindergarten. He can't settle down. One night in his parents' house, tossing and turning in bed, a man he knew in Ireland visits him in a vision. So he has this vision of this Irish guy that he knew. Victorious, holding countless letters, one of which he hands to Patricius, who reads its heading, Vox Hiberniacum, the voice of the Irish. At that moment, he hears the voice of a multitude. Like he has this vision. He hears this voice of many Irish people crying to him, we beg you to come and walk among us once more. Top of 106. He hears a voice speaking within him. He who gave his life for you, i.e. Jesus, who gave his life for you, he it is who speaks within you. So he's like, what is this voice I'm hearing calling me to go back to Ireland? And Patrick, claims in his memoir, so to speak, talking about his life, that basically, he sent this vision by God of the people asking him to come back and bring Christianity to the Irish, bring the Christian faith to the Irish. And so, for better or worse, whatever your personal perspective is, this is what Patrick claims that he hears. Page 106, first full paragraph. Patrick will never make up for the formal education he missed while herding sheep in Antrim, Ireland. His whole life will be shadowed by his ignorance of Latin style. Latin is like the writing of the Catholic Church and stuff. Before the fall and even after the fall of the Roman Empire, as the Catholic Church picks back up and becomes like the major cultural force. His whole life will be shadowed by his ignorance of Latin style and his consequent inability to communicate with distinguished men on their own level. So for the rest of life, he'll struggle when he gets together with people who have church leaders who have the equivalent of PhDs and stuff, because he never got the best formal education. Page 107. First full paragraph. But he does go into seminary. He does go into Bible study because he feels he's called to go back to Ireland as a missionary. At length, he is ordained a priest and a bishop. So he gets ordained, meaning he gets his diploma to be a priest, to be a bishop. Virtually, he's the first missionary bishop in history. We understand that Jesus' 12 apostles preached his good news, the good spell or gospel, to use the Old English term, after the descent of the Spirit at the Feast of Pentecost in Jerusalem, and that they intended to preach to the ends of the earth. We're a little uncertain as to how far most of them actually got, though we think Peter was nailed upside down to a cross at Rome. Thomas, in legend, at least got as far as India. But the first Christian missionary for whom we have extensive documentation is Paul, not one of the original apostles, but an apostle, as he puts it, appointed not by humans, that is, appointed by a vision. Patrick may be the second such appointment. What is remarkable is not that Patrick should have felt an overwhelming sense of mission, but that in the 4 centuries between Paul and Patrick, there are no missionaries. And so it's interesting that even though at the end of Jesus' stay on earth, when his last words to his followers are, go into all the world and tell them about me, tell them about the gospel, that I died for them, so that to believe in me, that I came back to life, right? Even though these are Jesus' last words, between Paul and Patrick, there are like 400 years. And in that 400 years, basically nobody goes. There aren't any foreign missionaries, people who are like, I'm going to take the message to another culture, right? And so is this laziness? Is this not caring very much? Of course, again, this is Cahill's perspective on history, right? So we've got to take it with the assumption there may be some bias here. You never know. I mean, people are biased, but he's like, why is it that not more people have gone in 400 years than have? But you've got Patrick, and he's got this heart, this burden for the Irish people. Page 108, and he's going to go. Page 108, the first full paragraph, go down 5 lines. So Patrick was really the first missionary to barbarians beyond or outside of the reach of Roman law. The step he took was in its way as bold as Columbus. He's as bold as Columbus, 1,000 times more humane. So Columbus may have been bold, but Columbus was also cruel. He was an asshole, Patrick is all heart. He's not trying to extend an empire here. He's just burdened for these people that he lived with all these years as a slave. He wants to go back to them in a spirit of love and bring a message that he thinks they need. Whatever we believe, he thinks they need this message, and it's all love. He just wants to go back to him, to help him. 108 down near the bottom there. Nor was he blind to his dangers, for even in his last years, every day I'm ready to be murdered, betrayed, enslaved, whatever may come my way. But I am not afraid of any of these things because of the promises of heaven, for I put myself in the hands of God Almighty. And so Patrick, his whole life, even when he's over there, he knows that any day he could be murdered or betrayed or made a slave again. He doesn't worry. He's got a calling. He's got a mission. Page 109, first full paragraph. His love for his adopted people shines through his writings, and is not just a generalized Christian love, but a love for individuals as they are. Jesus said, love everybody, but this is very specific, a love for individuals as they are. He tells us of a blessed woman, Irish by birth, noble, extraordinarily beautiful, a true adult whom I baptized. Who could imagine such frank admiration of a woman from the pen of Augustine? Augustine thought women were evil, basically. He wouldn't be writing about this. Well, or maybe he would. Again, this is Cahill's bias. But Patrick's very down to earth. He's not a hyper-educated guy who just talks about deep ideas and talks about, yes, love everyone. He's a down-to-earth person who loves individuals, who loves and cares about people, who's willing to leave all of his comfort and go to them, to help them. Middle paragraph 109, he worries constantly for his people, not just for their spiritual, but for their physical welfare. The horror of slavery was never lost on him. But it is the women kept in slavery who suffer the most, Patrick says, and who keep their spirits up despite the menacing and terrorizing they must endure. The Lord gives grace to his many handmaids, to the women who are believers, and though they are forbidden to do so, they follow him with backbone. Patrick has become an Irishman, a man who can give far more credibility to a woman's strength and fortitude than could any classically educated man. In a sense, Patrick understands meta. He understands women as just as important as men in God's kingdom, as significant actors, not just the men roles. 110. Go up page 110, go down about 8 lines. But whereas Augustine might have viewed this arrangement as ideal for currying favor and subtly and gradually increasing the power of the church, Patrick could have had no such motives, for ancient Ireland had no civitates, no population centers of any kind, just scattered and isolated farmsteads. By placing his bishops next door to the kings, Patrick hoped to keep an eye on the most powerful raiders and rustlers and limit their depredations. So as Patrick in Ireland gains converts, he does try and make sure that his converts, the ones who become, like whom he trains, they form relationships with the Irish kings and stuff, because Patrick's trying to keep an eye on what's going on, right? But it's not, really, Ireland doesn't have any big cities. Patrick's not out for political power here. He's more trying to keep an eye on the suffering of the people and the dangers to them. And part of that is having some of his followers, some of his trained bishops, be close to in relationship with the little Irish kings that are around Ireland. With the Irish, even with the kings, he succeeded beyond measure, middle of 110. Within his lifetime, or soon after his death, the Irish slave trade came to a halt and other forms of violence. So Patrick basically ends the Irish slave trade with his influence, with the influence of Christianity, really. In reforming Irish sexual mores, he was rather less successful, though he established indigenous monasteries and convents whose inmates, by their way of life, reminded the Irish that the virtues of lifelong faithfulness, courage, and generosity were actually attainable by ordinary human beings. The sword was not the only instrument for structuring a society. So Ireland's teaching these people, peace can also be instrumental in a society. It doesn't just have to be the sword and violence. Patrick's relationship with his British brothers. So Patrick's getting along very well with the Irish. Not so well with English Christians just across the water. We're less happy. At bottom of page 110. Rising petty kings along the western coast of Britain, rushing to fill the power vacuum left by the departure of the Roman legions, began to carve out new territories for themselves and take up piracy. Page 111. So you've got these, now the English, who are supposedly Christians, are coming over to the Irish, who now, even in Patrick's time, he's so successful, they're becoming a Christian country. But the English are like, dude, no, the Irish are barbarians, and so they're coming over and they're carrying them off in boatloads as slaves. And Patrick is furious. He's ticked off. He's pissed, Page 111, first full paragraph. Patrick sends a delegation of priests. He sends a group of Irish priests to the court of Coroticus in the hopes of ransoming the captives. He's going to try and pay to get these Irish people back who have been taken as slaves. Having failed to get any hearing from the king, and now at his wit's end, Patrick writes an open letter to British Christians. He writes a letter to all British Christians in an attempt to put pressure on Coroticus, the king. It is a wail of mourning for his lost people. Patricide, fratricide, wolves eating up the people of the Lord like bread. I ask you earnestly, it's not right to pay court. It's not right to honor kings like this, or to take such men, nor to take food and drink in their company, nor is it right to accept their alms until they do penance. And so Patrick sees the Irish being carried off as slaves to England by English people who claim to be Christians, and he's like, for one thing, this is wrong. Slavery, it's immoral. And he's like, for another thing, these are Christians just like you, So number one, they're not barbarians, and number two, this is slavery, Page 112, first full paragraph, 3 lines down. In this period of human development, only a former slave could have condemned the slave trade with such heat. So, like, most of society is like slavery, that's a way of life. And Patrick, the former slave who went back to the people who made him a slave to show them love, to change their society, is now seeing the believers, the Irish believers, carried off as slaves by the English, and he's furious. He's speaking up. He's an abolitionist. 112, middle paragraph. We know that even in the midst of his agony, Patrick saw clearly the obstacle to his success. In sadness and grief shall I cry aloud, O most lovely and loving brethren and sons whom I have begotten in Christ. He sees the Irish as his children in Jesus. What will I do for you? What can I do for you? I am not worthy to come to the aid of either God or men. The wickedness of the wicked has prevailed against us. Wicked men have fought us. We are become, as it were, strangers. We're like strangers to them. They should see us as their Christian brothers and sisters. But they look at us like strangers and make slaves out of us. Notice he says us. He's basically become Irish. Can it be that they do not believe that we have received one baptism, or that we have one God and Father, that we believe the same thing they believe? It is a shameful thing in their eyes that we have been. Is it a shameful thing in their eyes that we have been born in Ireland? That we have been born in Ireland? He wasn't born in Ireland, but he's identified with it. He was born again. He did become a Christian in Ireland. So in a sense, maybe that's what he's talking about. The British Christians did not recognize the Irish Christians either as full-fledged Christians or as human beings, because the Irish were not Roman. Just like white Americans, didn't recognize Africans as people because they were black. So the mainland Europeans, don't recognize the Irish as human beings because they're not Roman, even though really the English are not Roman either, but they are Roman Catholic, right? Really the English are the descendants of the German barbarians that came down. And so top 113, Patrick is no longer British or Roman at all. When he cries out in his pain, it is a shameful thing that we have been born in Ireland. We know he has left the old civilization behind forever and has identified himself completely with the Irish. Page 114, first full paragraph. However blind his British contemporaries may have been to it, the greatness of Patrick is beyond dispute. You can't argue that Patrick was a great human being. The first human, even if you don't share, any religious belief, the first human being in the history of the world to speak out unequivocally against slavery, nor will any voice as strong as his be heard again until the 17th century. So Cahill is arguing here that basically, in the history of the world, Patrick is the first person that we read of who puts his foot down and says slavery is wrong. No matter what, it's wrong. It's evil. Going down page 114, about halfway down that first full paragraph, Patrick shows us that he understood the dual concept of the city of man and the city of God, as well as Augustine himself, when he derides the king Coroticus and his men as dogs and sorcerers and murderers and liars and false swearers, this English king and his people, who distribute baptized girls. You sell Christian, Irish girls for a price, and that for the sake of a miserable temporal kingdom. You don't care about the spiritual, about heaven. You just care about down here, what you can get out of this world, which truly passes away in a moment like cloud or smoke that is scattered by the wind. But talking about the Irish, Patrick says, O most dear ones, I can see you beginning the journey to the land where there is no night, nor sorrow, nor death, meaning heaven. You will reign with the apostles and prophets and martyrs. You will seize the everlasting kingdoms. Page 115, middle paragraph. In becoming an Irishman, Patrick wedded his world to theirs, his faith to their life. So in becoming Irish, it's like Patrick creates a marriage of Christianity and Irish culture. For Augustine in the Roman Church of the first 5 centuries after Jesus was born, baptism, the mystical water ceremony in which the naked catechumen dies to sin, was the foundation of a Christian life. Patrick found a way of swimming down the depths of the Irish psyche and warming and transforming Irish imagination, making it more humane and more noble while keeping it Irish. And so somehow Patrick just finds a way to transform Irish culture, and Cahill will get to more of that later. Bring out good, while also making it still Irish, letting it continue as an Irish thing, and not just forcing European Catholic culture on them. Bottom of 115. Of the many legends surrounding Patrick, few can be authenticated. He did not chase the snakes out of Ireland. There is no way of knowing whether he used the shamrock to explain the Trinity. If you want to look that up, you're welcome to. There's some fascinating myths about Patrick, that he chased all of Ireland's snakes out. There are no more snakes in Ireland, actually. A myth, and who knows? Who knows if this is a myth? He took the shamrock, the 3-leaf clover, and used it to explain the 3 parts of God: God the Son, God the Father, God the Holy Spirit. That seems a little more likely than that he chased all the snakes away. Just some legends about him. 116, middle paragraph. You have something called Patrick's breastplate. And this is a poem, which we don't actually know if Patrick wrote this or not, but it's a really famous poem, which very much, even if he didn't write it, even if like one of his followers wrote it, it just sums up who Patrick is. Middle of 116. On the other hand, it's talking about Patrick's breastplate. On the other hand, it is patrician. It's like Patrick to its core. The first ringing assertion that the universe itself is the great sacrament. The sacrament being when Jesus gave bread and wine to his followers and said, "This is my body, this is my blood." Patrick says the universe is the sacrament. The universe is the Lord's Supper, magically designed by its loving creator, God, to bless human beings. The earliest expression of European poetry, vernacular poetry, like people normally talk, it is, in attitude, the work of a Christian druid, like a Christian Irish priest, a man of both faith and magic. Its feeling is entirely un-Augustinian. Doesn't feel like Augustine. It's not like laying out, this is what we believe. It's much more just this Irish. It's all about the emotion, the feeling, right? But it's this feeling that will go on to animate the best poetry of the Middle Ages. If Patrick did not write it, at least in its current form, it's surely inspired by Patrick. Maybe we don't know who wrote it, but it's gone down in history as Patrick's breastplate, as his poem. And I'm not going to read the whole thing here. You've got it right there in front of you. But this poem just wraps up and expresses Patrick's personality. I do want to read a little bit of it. On page 118, this is interesting. As part of his breastplate, his prayer here, Patrick says, I call today all these powers, meaning all the power of God, between me and those evils, against every cruel and merciless power that may oppose my body and soul, against incantations of false prophets, against black laws of pagandom, against false laws of heretics, against craft of idolatry, against spells of witches and smiths and wizards, against every knowledge that corrupts man's body and soul. In that part, Christ to shield me today against poison, against burning, against drowning, against wounding, so that there may come to me abundance of reward. And as 21st century Americans and Western Europeans, Um, all of this stuff about Patrick saying that he's calling on the power of God to protect him against witches and spells and wizards. We may have a tendency to like laugh at that. Oh yeah, you need protection against witches. But you got to remember that, you know, C.S. Lewis once talked about that we tend to be able to believe what we've already decided we're going to believe. And in Western culture today, we've kind of already decided that we don't we don't believe in things like magic. We don't believe in things like the supernatural and God. Um, and therefore, if we were to see the supernatural, as C.S. Lewis would argue, we wouldn't realize it. We wouldn't recognize it. We wouldn't recognize it. But we're looking at a culture here where they knew that the supernatural was there. I mean, these people lived in fear. And if you look, a lot of cultures today, Haiti, Africa, and lots of other countries and their cultures, they they know that the supernatural is there. It's almost in a sense, maybe you can make the argument that we don't know about the supernatural in America, for example, or in Western Europe, because we've already decided that it doesn't exist. It's kind of like we've just covered our eyes so that we can't see it. Whereas if you haven't decided it doesn't exist, then boom, there it is. You can see it. And so this in Irish culture, for Patrick to pray for protection against magic and against poison, he had a lot of enemies. The old religious leaders of Ireland, the Druids, who were trying to keep the people in superstition, trying to keep them in fear, trying to encourage this. Patrick shows up with the message of God dying for them because he loves them. And that doesn't suit well with, the ancient Irish belief. And so the Druids have got it out for Patrick. Even as an old man, Patrick knows that any day he could be murdered or poisoned or something because he's got a lot of enemies, even though he's also incredibly successful. And so this is a very real prayer for Patrick, and the Irish would have seen this and been like, yeah, danger against magic, against sorcery, against witches, things like that, right? This last part of this, I'll just read it because it's incredibly famous. Page 118, the last two lines, continue over to the next page. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me. Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I rise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. And again, I feel like it's an important point that Cahill he's not writing, a book trying to win converts to Christianity, but he is writing about just the way that Patrick transformed this culture, because he came into a culture that was just eaten up with a sense of fear and not knowing what the next minute would hold. And he'll talk more about that later on. And Patrick comes in with this message of love, and transforms their culture, transforms it, and so, and we're gonna talk about that more as we discuss the next chapter. But all of these things, as you're listening through these lectures, be thinking about whatever topic you're choosing for your paper. How can this help you? How can something in this help you to write on that topic, whether it's human trafficking or issues with the Roman Catholic Church in our own day and age, slavery, women's roles, Medib as a person, right? Women's rights, whatever you're going to write on, think about how it connects back to the issues talked about in the book and as we're going through these lectures. All right. Thanks for listening.